Order. Welcome to this afternoon's session of the Justice Select Committee, at which we will be looking at the work of the Criminal Cases Review Commission. We have the Chief Executive and the Casework Operations Director to give evidence. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves and their work in a moment, but first I will ask the members of the committee if they have any declarations of interest to make, starting with Sarah Russell.
My declarations are on the register, but in general it would probably be helpful for you to know that I'm a solicitor specialising in employment law, although I am not currently practising, and I'm a member of various trade unions.
I'm Pam Cox, and my interests are as declared on the register.
Hello, Mike Tapp, declared on register and worked for the National Crime Agency in the past.
Andy Slaughter, I'm the chair of the committee. I'm a non-practising barrister. I'm a member of GMB and Unite Trade Unions and the patron of two law-related charities, Hamilton Fulham Law Centre and the Upper Room.
Desmond, everything's on the register, but I would just draw your attention to the fact that I am a director of Whistleblowers UK, which is a non-profit making organisation.
Morning to just my interests are on the register. I'm an executive council member of the GMB Trade Union and member of various APPGs. I'm a solicitor, but not practising at the moment.
Good afternoon, Ashley Fox, and my interests are on the register.
Thank you very much, everyone. Well, I say welcome again. Perhaps, because I know you've both got a long history with the CCRC, you could introduce yourself, starting with Kneller, set out what your current roles are, say when you joined the Commission, and what roles you've played in the organisation.
Absolutely. So I'm Karen Kneller. I'm the Chief Executive of the Commission. I joined the Commission in 2005 as the Director of Casework. And in 2013 I took up the role of Chief Executive. So my responsibility as Chief Executive is the day-to-day running and management of the organisation.
You're based in Birmingham and you work from Birmingham?
So, the office is based in Birmingham. I work remotely, but I live in the West Midlands.
Just out of interest, what does that mean in terms of how many days a week would you be in the office?
I'm probably in the office maybe 1 or 2 days every couple of months or so.
1 or 2 days every couple of months?
So we are not an office-based organisation anymore.
By Ms. Pearce.
That's okay. I'm Amanda Pearce. I'm a solicitor. I'm the Casework Operations Director for CCRC. I joined on the 1st of April 1997 when we started work, and I joined in an administrative capacity. I moved into the role of a case review manager in around 1999. I was then a group leader from 2012, so responsible for managing one of our casework teams, and I've been in the director role since early 2021. In which role I'm responsible for our 6 casework teams, our legal and investigations team, and our forensic opportunities programme.
I'll ask you the same question. Are you Birmingham based, and how much time do you spend in the office? I
work from home and as part of our remote working arrangements, and so similar to Karen, I would be in the office maybe 1 or 2 days every couple of months.
Was there a point, and we will come on to this in more detail later, but was there a point when the organisation changed from being an office-based to a remote working organisation? When was that and why was that?
So shall I take it? So probably like many in the company, primarily that move started during COVID through the lockdowns. And we found that before we went into lockdown, we were struggling to appoint case review managers. We had effectively exhausted the local pool of candidate. It's quite a specialist skill set that we look for in case review managers. What we did find was that by recruiting nationally, we were able to fill vacancies that we wouldn't have been able to fill. So that was the driver for, once we were through lockdown, effectively becoming a home-based organisation. So we have a small team that are in the office every day. So there's a reception there. IT are based there, but most staff work remotely and will go in a few days when there's a need perhaps to, something that requires them to be on site. So we work remotely now, and because of that, we've been able to ensure that we've been able to fill vacancies which we simply wouldn't have been able to have filled before.
Almost every organisation in the country had to go to home working in part or full during COVID, but most of them have now returned to working most of the week at least from an office basis. You're in Birmingham, which is very central. It's the second city of the country. It's in the middle of the country. Are you saying that this was forced upon you because you simply couldn't recruit after several attempts, or that you made a policy change to switch to a different way of working?
Well, I wouldn't say it was forced on us, it was our decision, but we were faced with a situation where I think we'd had possibly 4 or 5 recruitment rounds, and we could no longer match the salaries in Birmingham, I suppose second city, of some of the businesses that were in the area. So we were struggling to fill casework slots, and that was a real concern. And since we've moved to remote working, we have been able to fill those vacancies with some exceptional people. I don't know whether, Amanda, you want to say anything on that?
Yeah, we've also been able to better reflect our geographical jurisdiction as well. So for the first time, we've got case review managers based over in Northern Ireland to reflect the Northern Irish jurisdiction that we have. And we've got people across the country, which makes it, in some circumstances, more efficient for us to be able to work as well in terms of work outside the office.
You've both been at the Commission for a very long time, in your case since it began. So you're in a good position to tell us whether you think it's changed materially, whether that's for the better or the worse over that period. We just discussed one area where it's changed. What do you see as the role of the Commission, and how has that changed over the 20 or 25 years you've both been involved with it, or more than that? And as I say, is it for the better or worse?
So in terms of the Commission's role, I don't see that has changed. I mean, we are about finding, investigating and referring miscarriages of justice. I think what has changed is that, as you've heard, we have moved to remote ways of working, so that's a change. And as a result of that, we have been able to, I think, see our performance both be shored up and improve. Our referrals have risen. So I think the main change has been around how we engage people, but the doing of the work hasn't changed, other than, sort of picking up on Amanda's point, having people geographically spread has meant we can tap into the local knowledge that perhaps we weren't able to before. So for example, our jurisdiction includes Northern Ireland, but it's only in the last couple of years or so that we've actually had people in Northern Ireland. So I think that was something that was long overdue.
I think that's right. I think processes may have developed over the years. What hasn't changed is that commitment to finding and referring miscarriages of justice. That dedication that was there when we started is still there today.
Well, I hear what you say, but you must have read a lot of commentary about the organisation in the last few months, and the general perceived wisdom is that the organisation is a shadow of its former self, and we'll go on to explore some of the areas where we think that's occurred. But it would be strange if none of that had touched you as the people who run the organisation. So can I ask the question again? Do you think, how has the way the organisation works and its performance and its success changed over the years you've been involved?
So I think I would invite the committee and anyone sort of tuning in today to consider the Commission's performance not only through the small number of cases that get into the headlines, but across the whole sphere of the work that we do. And I think that's really important. I don't see that there is a tension between a change in the way that we are based in respect of how we are performing. In fact, our performance over the last few years, intake has risen significantly. We're closing more cases, we're referring more cases. But there is the challenge that the majority of our casework isn't seen and it doesn't hit the headlines. So our performance is assessed and judged only by really what we see in the press.
Well, we're all judged by our failures rather than our successes, I suspect.
Thank you. May I just pick you up on the statements you're making about being more successful in referrals? I think I've got the facts here that say that in 2024, CCRC received 1,629 applications. 25 were referred to the Court of Appeal, which is fewer than 2%. And in reality, I suspect to most of us, the only thing that matters is referrals to the Court of Appeal. There's no other way that a wrongful conviction can be overturned. So you're saying you're closing more cases. Well, that's great. I suspect we can all close cases. I'd love to be able to do that in my job. But I can't. I have to pursue them through to the end. And I think probably the general view might be that closing cases and putting them in the archive is not the same as actually being very, very rigorous. And perhaps I'll leave it there, but 25 going to the Court of Appeal, fewer than 2%, is not a huge number, is it? So you're saying that you're very confident that 1,604 applications were absolutely fit and fine for those people to be held in custody.
I think what I was saying was that because we have improved our ways of working, we have got, I think, better at how we investigate and review cases. And certainly from our data, I think the last business year, our number of referrals increased by nearly a quarter on the year before. Now, we know that those...
From what to what?
I know those numbers are quite small, but, we are looking at, I think now about 870 referrals since we've been in existence. So that's hundreds and
since
hundreds.
When?
Since we've been in existence. So there's hundreds and hundreds of referrals.
So you're saying that there have been
873.
73 referrals to the Court of Appeal since exactly when?
1997.
Since the Commission came into operation.
Okay, thank you.
When did you want to?
Yeah, I'm just trying to seek clarification on the link between recruitment and remote working. Are you saying that you had difficulty in recruiting because people did not want to come into the office?
No, sorry, I think you're about to jump in there. We had difficulty recruiting because the package we were offering wasn't good enough when compared to other packages in the area.
And also because we were confined to that geographical area around Birmingham, commuting distance to Birmingham. Now that we work remotely, we've got people based across the UK. So we've got people up in the northeast, we've got people down in the southwest. So it's opened up the pool that we can draw from when we're looking for the people who've got the right skills and the right attributes for filling those difficult and challenging roles that we have.
So remote working has increased the pool from which you can select. Okay, thank you.
The chair, as we know, left the organisation on the 14th of January. You haven't had a chair since then. Do you know when you're going to get at least an interim chair?
No. I understand that MOJ is sort of approaching the end of what has been quite a long process, but no, I don't, and we're not involved in that process.
And that chair, we know, won't just presumably supervise the organisation, supervise you both, but will also undertake a review. Do you know what that review is likely to involve?
No.
When the chair, the last chair resigned, she commented in her resignation letter that some departing commissioners had advised her to remove the senior management team, but she didn't because you're still here. But what did you think when you read that? And do you think you're the right people to lead the organisation?
Well, I do think we're the right people to lead the organisation. I don't think it would be appropriate for me to comment on something that was reproduced in the press.
Well, it is from the letter of the resigning.
Yeah, so I think it was unfortunate the way that perhaps the resignation was approached, but in any event, we are leading an organisation which has been handling 30,000 or so cases. We've sustained and I would say improved performance, it felt a very strange thing to say in a resignation letter, and it was perhaps disappointing and I think upsetting to some members of staff that there was no reflection in that letter of or thanks to case review staff who've been essentially sort of busting a gut on cases.
Since the chairman departed, what changes have you made to case management processes and personnel?
So, since the ex-chair stepped down, what changes have we made to processes, casework processes? I'm not sure, other than the Forensic Opportunities Programme is probably the big one.
Yes, so we've been in the process of implementing the recommendations that Mr Henley made in his review, and that's been an ongoing piece of work. So that has, for example, there is the Forensic Opportunities Programme that Karen mentioned, which I can go into in more detail if you like. We have also looked at our approach to obtaining police material, and we've made some changes around that. We have revised and updated some of our guidance in relation to working with applicants and communicating with applicants. We've also delivered some additional training that Mr Henley recommended.
Who is actually running the organisation now? Because my understanding it's a body corporate. It requires having a chair who has to be a commissioner as well. Have the other commissioners stepped in to run the organisation, or are you running it?
No, so we don't currently have a chair of the commission. One of our independent non-executive directors, the senior independent, chairs board meetings, but we are currently without a chair. So the role of the chair, as you will know, is around governance, leading the board, very much the sort of outward-facing, the figurehead, and that we currently don't have. So I'm responsible for the sort of day-to-day operations with Amanda and the others in the senior team. So that continues. And whilst the chair has stepped down, and of course that has, I think, presented certainly a gap and some uncertainty in the organisation, I think it's really important to sort of assure you that in terms of casework and applicants, that has not been affected. So we've remained very focused on casework operations.
Can that be right? I know you might wish that to be right, but can that be right, given there was a long period of uncertainty before the previous chair, a lot of adverse publicity, including about the way the organisation was run. The chair went in January. You're still awaiting the appointment of a chair now. So are you seriously saying that the organisation is running as normal or better than it was under its chair?
So I think in terms of casework, I think it absolutely is running really well. We've worked very hard to keep people focused on that day-to-day, that core purpose of casework, running alongside implementing the recommendations from Mr Henley's report. But it has, without doubt, I mean, it did cause a period, I think, of upset. People were unsettled. There was a lot of uncertainty. No one knew what was going on. But staff, they have really sort of committed and doubled down to focusing on getting those cases out through the door. And I think in the last, the beginning of the calendar year to now, I think we've had 17 or 18 referrals. So even with all the noise that's going on in the background, the focus has been on doing the casework. It would be easier if that noise wasn't there, for sure, and it would certainly be easier if we had our interim chair in post, but, you know, that's not within my gift.
You're saying that all the publicity and interventions that have happened over the last year or so have been noise in the background. That's how you put it, is it?
No, what I'm saying is that for casework, we've had to focus them on the casework to make sure that we're continuing doing that day job. Obviously, we've been, I think the organisation was really struck by a lot of the criticism that was in the press. So, and we've taken that on board, and we've particularly taken it on board by, of course, focusing on delivering the recommendations in Mr. Henley's report.
Now, the criticism isn't, first of all, press criticism isn't necessarily irrelevant, and secondly, it's not just in the press, is it? And we're just going to come on to ask some questions about the Malkinson case and the Henley report. But sorry, do you want to come in on this before we move on?
I just wanted to pick up a point that you'd made, that there'd been 800 referrals to the Court of Appeal. It looks to me like you were established in 1995. So some quick maths produces 26 referrals a year. Does that seem about right?
So that probably is about right. It was 1997, forgive me, when we opened our doors. And I think it's probably 30 referrals a year on average.
Your last year's accounts show that you cost about £10 million.
Yes.
Of which your expenditure was 9.5 million in 23-24. It was up from 6.5 million in 22-23. You seem to have vacated physical premises. The staffing costs were 6.4 million. So I was wondering what the other 2.8 million had gone on, and whether you feel overall that £10 million a year for 30 referrals a year looks like value.
Well, I guess, on what was that 2 million spent on, I would anticipate or venture to guess that was in respect of capital and the digital programme, but we can provide a breakdown of that if that would be helpful. Most of our money is spent on the day-to-day running of the organisation, the cost of doing casework, the cost of engaging casework staff and commissioners. Good value for money, well, I'm not sure that that's a question for me to answer. I would say that every referral we find is good value for money. No one has, I think, said what we should be finding, what is the right number of referrals, because the majority of cases that we see, we don't see anything in there that would lead to a successful referral, if I can use that as shorthand. But there has, as far as I'm aware, yet no discussion around what would be the right number of referrals.
What do you believe would be the right number of referrals? And do you think you're meeting it?
I don't think there is a right number of referrals. We can only refer those cases that meet the statutory test.
Yep.
And you would be absolutely right, that would be an awful lot of money if we'd only looked at the 30 cases that were referred. But of course, to find those 30 cases, we have to look at everything that comes through the door. So that's 1,600 cases a year that we have to work on. And we have to look at each of those carefully to assess whether they meet that test for referral. So, yes, as I say, if we were only looking at such a small number of cases, that wouldn't be good value for money. But we have to look at everything, and we have to look at it carefully.
And what evaluation do you do of value for money within the organisation?
For us, it's about the quality of the casework. So we have quality management systems to ensure that we are producing good quality casework and are learning. And clearly, we know that we got it wrong in Mr. Malkinson's case, and we are learning from that. So that's our approach. It's about, we're always looking for, are there ways of doing things more efficiently, because we are concerned that the longer a case is open, that's not good for an applicant. But that is how we would view and assess value for money. And I think Amanda's right. It comes back to most of our casework is not seen by the public. Most of it is low profile. Even the successful referrals tend not to hit the headlines. So, I can see how you could say on the one hand a small number of referrals, how's that good value for money when you have a budget of X million? But we are talking about thousands of cases.
You'll have to be a little bit more disciplined in my... Mike first.
Thank you, Chair. It's just to pick up a little more on referrals. I was going to talk about it later, but as we're touching on it now, that the Law Commission consultation on criminal appeals in February said that the current referral test is hindering the correction of miscarriages of justice, and that a non-predictive test would be more appropriate. Do you agree with that, and do you think that could be causing it to be too low?
Well, when we investigate cases, we're obviously investigating them within the parameters of the tests that we currently have. And we've put our hands up for some time to say we would welcome a review of the test. I don't know, Amanda, whether...
Don't think we have, or I know we don't have a pile of cases that we say, if only it was a different test, we would be able to refer these. We work to the test that exists. It's obviously a test of Parliament's making, not of our making. But we are open to, the review of that test. We're open to other suggestions as to whether there might be other tests that would apply.
And so just so I get this right, and who makes the decision on the test that's applied? Is that Parliament?
Yes, so it's set in statute. It's in the Criminal Appeal Act.
Thank you.
Yes, just quickly. I understand the point that most of the cases that you see would not be referred, but you would still have to assess those cases.
Yes.
So out of the 30 referrals on average that you do refer to the Court of Appeal, how many cases are you actually assessing on average every year? You did mention 30,000 figure earlier on. Are you saying you assess up to 30,000 a year?
No, it's about 1,500, 1,600 a year that come to us. So
last year we completed 1,482 cases that we looked at and made a decision on.
Just a quick question for me. You do say that you're focused on quality, but we had a look at your key performance indicators, and 5 of those are about timeliness and only 2 are about quality. Is that significant?
I think that's partly because quality is quite difficult to measure in numbers to turn it into a key performance indicator. So timeliness is sort of relatively easy to measure in numbers, and it's important to applicants as well. So you couldn't really say that you'd conducted a quality review if it had taken longer than it should. So timeliness is important to applicants. We do have the other quality indicators there which look at whether we've had to reopen cases as a result of errors. But there is then a separate quality management system which involves scrutiny of cases by group leaders. Nothing is ever decided that hasn't been looked at by at least 2 people, often many more. We've also got our long-running cases committee that looks at cases that have been under review for longer. So there are other mechanisms for assuring the quality of the work that we do.
Exactly on that point, how do you then define and measure quality?
So our quality is about making sure that we conduct a thorough review in a reasonable time frame, but we're aiming to reach the right outcome. So one of the measures that we use there is cases that we've had to reopen. It's a very small number, but that may be as a result of judicial review, or as a result of a complaint, or as a result of post-closure correspondence. So we will always look again at a case if we think there's something that's gone wrong there. But generally speaking, our quality is around ensuring that we do everything we need to do in a reasonable time and reach a reasoned decision.
And what proportion of the staff are legally trained?
So in terms of our case review managers, we've got 40 case review managers. About half of them are lawyers. The others will come from a different variety of backgrounds. So they may be former investigators, former police officers. They may come from slightly broader backgrounds. And then the proportion of our commissioners that's legally qualified would be, I think...
Quite high.
It's quite high, yeah.
2/3?
At least 2/3, I think, possibly higher.
Forgive me, do you both have backgrounds as lawyers?
Yeah.
I'm a barrister. I'm sorry, I should have said that in the intro.
Yeah, and I'm a solicitor.
Yeah. And they also have access to our in-house legal team as well, if they want it.
You need to move on. Tessa?
Yes, I'm just picking up on what you said. I wonder if I would invite you to write to the chair. I'd be quite interested in knowing how many of the cases that you have referred are matters of process as opposed to matters of fact and evidence. because I'm aware, for example, I know it's a very historic couple of cases, but there's McDade and I think Clark, which were purely about somebody not having signed a piece of paper somewhere, and you can claim that as a win, even though in fact everybody sort of, I think, broadly decided that the people concerned were guilty of GBH, if I remember rightly. But I just wondered if you might actually inform the chair of those process matters as opposed to evidence and fact.
I think there are very few that are as technical as Clark and McDade. I think there are other cases where you might describe it as process, but process can encompass a lot of things. Process could encompass non-disclosure. It could encompass abuse of process. So I think it's important to remember that where a referral may be about the process, it's not necessarily just a technicality. It's about ensuring the integrity of the system. It's the things that protect everybody and not just that individual in that case.
Good. Thank you.
We can certainly write, and we've got a case library up on our website which goes back through our referrals, and that's quite...
Can you say that again? I couldn't hear that.
Sorry, no. We have, so firstly, yes, we can certainly write with that information, and second, we have a case library that we've recently published on our website which goes through the history of all of our referrals.
Thank you. Can I ask you, do you agree with the findings of Chris Henley's review?
Yes.
You do. Thank you. I want to move particularly to the Andrew Malkinson case. So, as I think probably everybody knows now, the 26th of July 2023 was when the Court of Appeal quashed Andrew Malkinson's convictions. And it was August 2023 and in April 24 that Helen Pitcher, who as then chair, apologised to Andrew Malkinson for the CCRC's handling of his case. Can I ask, Ms Kneller, have you apologised to Andrew Malkinson?
So have I apologised?
Yes.
No, I haven't.
Do you feel it might be appropriate to pass that apology now?
Absolutely. I mean, there is without doubt, we got that case wrong. Mr Malkinson was failed. We made mistakes in that case. We apologised. The organisation apologised. I think the decisions made then around when to apologise are probably decisions that would not be made today. So absolutely, I extend my apology to Mr Malkinson. Everyone in the organisation deeply regrets what happened on that case. I can't begin to think of the impact that this has had on him. I mean, the double impact of, serving a sentence, suffering a miscarriage of justice, and then the way we handled his case. So absolutely.
Thank you. Or if he follows up on any of these things, he will know and be grateful for that. But I think it was certainly the case that the CCRC's initial apology was deemed to be inadequate. So Chris Henley has said he provided his report to the CCRC in January 2024. Do you know why it wasn't published until the 18th of July 24?
So, Amanda might be able to help with some of the detail, but my understanding is that the report that we got in January was a draft. It certainly appeared to be a draft. It, I believe, had track changes in it, or
Might have done, I can't remember.
Or certainly a lot of typographical errors. And there were some factual issues which we needed to pick up with Mr Henley, which I think he was happy to adopt. And then we received the final report from Mr Henley, I believe was April.
Yeah. So the finished report was received in April.
It's still 3 months.
So it was received in April 2024. Before we could publish it, because of the Andrew Malkinson inquiry, because of the ongoing investigations in relation to the case, we needed to consult with the inquiry, with Greater Manchester Police, with the CPS, and with the Independent Office of Police Conduct to check whether there was anything in the report, if we were to publish it, that might prejudice those ongoing investigations and any potential future prosecutions. So there was a period then of agreeing redactions to the report at their request. That took us through until, I think, about the 20th of May. We shared the report with Mr Malkinson then. We also shared it with the victim of the original crime at that point. We were ready to publish when the general election was called, and we were advised not to publish during the general election, and so it was eventually published in July.
Who advised you that?
So I think it was probably the department, but it was the guidance that was issued on the pre-election period and what you can and cannot do meant we couldn't publish a report of that nature. So we wanted to publish because we had the report, and as Amanda said, there was an earlier opportunity to publish, but we couldn't because of liaison that needed to take place with the inquiry. So there were at least 2 opportunities to publish which we couldn't take up. So, but the pre-election guidance was clear. We could not publish in the run-up to the general election.
That if I may, sorry to interrupt, but that wasn't Mr Henley's view, was it? He said it seemed to me there was an attempt to downplay the seriousness of some of my findings and a very significant delay between the delivery of my report and its eventual publication. I provided my report to them in January and found it surprising, a little frustrating. It wasn't published till the end of July. I found some of the justification for the delay a little unconvincing. It was obvious to me that their priority was for the report not to present the whole organisation as failing. What do you say to that?
Well, so we received in April the final report from Mr Henley, so we couldn't have published it before then. And then we've had the sort of the various scenarios that Amanda's just outlined.
Sorry to interrupt, but did you not consider sending it to the IOPC and the other organisations you mentioned in its draft form? Surely that would have been sufficient as well. You could have done that in the January.
I think it would still have had to go back because they needed to see the final report to ensure that there was nothing in there.
So it didn't go to them in January?
No, it went to them when we'd received the finished report.
We still had what we had in January was a draft report.
Indeed, you've said.
Sorry?
Yes, that's what you said.
Yes.
Okay, so Chris Henley's view was that there was an early lack of oversight and direction in relation to Malkinson's case. So do you feel you were responsible for that lack of oversight and direction?
So this was an organisation that was, when I arrived, dealing with a huge backlog of cases that it had inherited from the Home Office. Cases were taking many years before they could even be allocated to a case review manager, so there were cases queuing. We had implemented a new structure of group leaders in the organisation to help support case review managers. So organisationally, I think that one didn't get the right attention and focus that it ought to have got. I think what happened was decisions were taken in good faith that took the people working on that case down a particular pathway, and that's where it went wrong.
So in good faith is not good enough, is it, when you're talking about justice?
No, absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. But this wasn't about anything other than people exercising discretion and judgment, making a mistake at the offset, not understanding issues around key points of evidence. And
I am amazed that you are saying that you have case review workers who don't understand the basics of evidence. I find that, but we're also talking about the oversight.
Yes, well,
are we not?
That isn't what I'm saying, and Amanda might be able to help on the detail. But in an organisation where we are looking at hundreds of cases,
you've said that quality is important.
Absolutely, and we have learned from that because what I was trying to go on to say was that we have learned a huge amount from those days when, as I arrived in the organisation, this is an organisation where casework wasn't even managed, really. We had no management structures in casework. A case would take as long as it would take. Case review managers were unsupported, so we introduced a system to support them, and we have learnt a lot from those days. So I think as a result we have seen quality and performance improve. But I would also urge the committee, and I think it is this case is an awful case. There's absolutely no getting away from that, and we got it wrong, and everyone in the organisation regrets that. But the majority of our casework is unseen, and
You've said.
Yeah.
Everyone will understand that. Most of the work that solicitors do is unseen. Most of the work that barristers do is unseen. You know, the judges' deliberations are unseen. It's the poor person who's not been served properly who needs to see this stuff sorted out and sorted out fairly. It's not even as though this is the only time that this has happened. Have you instigated a review of all of those cases that were so poorly managed before? Because there may well be people languishing in prison who might still be the subject of injustice.
Well, the Forensic Opportunities Programme is something that will deal with any of those. So if there are some cases which there have been issues in respect of forensics and DNA, we will find them through that programme.
Later.
Okay, fine. So, do you want
a few more?
Yes, I do. So, I wondered why the CCRC's response to the Henley report and the annual report of 23-24 says that Henley's findings are necessarily limited to the Andrew Malkinson case, because to me evidence suggests otherwise.
So, well, Mr. Henley's report was about the Andrew Malkinson case.
So you don't feel that there's any impact on any other?
No, I'm not saying that at all. I mean, I would not...
That's what the annual report says.
I wouldn't discount, we are a learning organisation. All organisations make mistakes, and I, cannot discount the possibility that a mistake has been made in a case elsewhere. We are learning
again, I'm sorry
all
to
the
interrupt,
time.
but the Henley report says, I'm sorry if I interrupt you, Tessa, but it says, I've made a series of recommendations at the end of this report, which I believe will, if fully implemented, make it much less likely that things could go as badly wrong for current and future applicants as they did for Mr. Malkinson. What it sounds like you're doing is you're saying this is just about Malkinson because that limits the culpability of the organisation.
No, maybe I'm not articulating it very well. I think we asked Mr. Henley to review how we performed in Mr. Malkinson's case. We are learning from the report that Mr. Henley produced and implementing the recommendations, which necessarily would apply across all of the casework function. So we're not saying, it's just one case where there's an issue. Otherwise, we wouldn't consider there was a need to commence a review of the Forensic Opportunities Programme. So what we're doing is we accept that we got it badly wrong in Mr. Malkinson's case, and we are learning from that and applying that across the whole organisation.
So can I ask you, what was the purpose of bringing in the crisis communications consultant in November 2023? I think it was Chris Webb, was it not?
Yes, so Mr. Webb was brought in because the communications team was a small team at that point. We needed the extra resource, and I thought it would be helpful to have an external perspective.
Okay, so did he tell you that he had serious concerns about CCRC's response to the Henley Review?
Not that I recall, no.
And did the CCRC attempt to edit the review report to water it down in any way?
No, absolutely not.
Okay, thank you.
There were factual issues which Amanda picked up with Mr. Henley, but absolutely not. Absolutely not.
How much should you pay for the specialist crisis communications consultant?
Ooh, I think it was less than £20,000.
Why did he resign?
I think he had. I think he was concerned around whether he could add anything else.
That sounds the end of his job, rather than. I mean, you're just saying he'd got to the end and it was all fine and off he went, as opposed to
I think he probably, I don't want to speak for him, and I've not had a conversation with him, but I think he probably may have hoped that the report had been published earlier.
And what stopped that?
I think there were a number of issues, some of which Amanda has alluded to, but I mean, I can't really comment any further because I've not had that conversation with Mr. Webb.
And did you have any concerns yourself about having a conflict of interest in that you had been, as I understand it, you were responsible in some way for managing the casework at a critical time in the Malkinson case, and yet you were also employing the comms specialist to deal with how the organisation
No, not at all, because he was an independent consultant. He was from outside of the organisation, and he brought in that fresh perspective.
Okay, thank you. And so you've said that you're learning from everything that happened. I just wondered whether you, how you might summarise that learning, and to express any regrets that you might have in the way that the CCRC handled the response to Andrew Malkinson's acquittal and to the publication of the Henley report.
I think in respect of the report and the handling of it, I think it's unfortunate that it took as long as it did to get it published. I think, as Amanda's explained, there were a couple of opportunities that we were ready to publish and we couldn't, but I think we probably could have got it published earlier, possibly. So that absolutely is a regret. And I think in terms of learning, I mean, I don't know how much detail you'd like us to go into in respect to the recommendations, but there are a lot of recommendations there. We've accepted all of them. We've added in a few of our own because we want to make sure that we really, really learn from this. But I'm kind of in your hands about how much detail you want.
Well, I think probably the best thing I'm going to ask you to do is to actually communicate with the chair after this. If you could write to the chair explaining exactly those things, that would be very helpful. Yes, I think that would be good because it will make it very clear.
Absolutely. So, I mean, a number of recommendations, and we update the board regularly, and certainly very happy to write to the committee with our progress in respect of those recommendations.
Thank you, and those that you've not progressed already as well. Thank you.
I think they've all been progressed, good. And I think some have been fully implemented. Yep. Yeah. So there's nothing that hasn't been progressed. I mean, we have really gone for it.
The other thing I'd quite like you to do is if you could dig out the instruction that you had not to publish during the period of the general election and send that to the chair as well. That'd be helpful.
Thank you. So I don't know whether there's a written instruction other than the guidance, the pre-election.
Then if you send the guidance to the chair, that'd be fine.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So turning to the substance of the Henley's reports, conclusions and recommendations, we've talked about the main lessons, but there's one bit where the Henley report says that the CCRC needs to aspire to capture more miscarriages of justice, and says the question should always be, might this be a miscarriage case? Rather than an exercise in thinking reasons why the Court of Appeal might reject the referral. Do you agree with this analysis?
I think we agree that our starting point in every case that comes through our door, every application that we look at is, might this be a miscarriage of justice? What if this is a miscarriage of justice? But we then have to go on and apply the statutory test and look at, for example, whether the person has exhausted the normal appeal process, whether there's something new, whether there's a real possibility of a successful appeal. We are obliged to apply the law that applies to the decisions that we make.
So I'm concerned only because there are other cases out there like Kneller, where broadly the same sort of things. There doesn't seem to have been, I recognise that's an old case and it was before Malkinson, but there is a pattern, isn't there, of trying to see whether this fits into a box that is the Court of Appeal will agree with this, or rather than actually looking from what you're saying, is you look at it as to whether this could be a miscarriage of justice. It looks slightly more process-driven about whether the Court of Appeal is going to run with this or not. That's how it might look to an outsider. Do you want to comment on that?
I guess, I think one of the challenges we have as an organisation is that we're quite restricted in what we can say. So a lot of our work may look process-driven. We can't get into the detail of the reasons quite often for why we have or haven't referred something. And that's something that bothers us because, you know, what we do, it's serious work and it's complicated work and it's very difficult getting that message over there, getting that message out there. But that is our starting point, as Amanda has explained. It's unfortunate if others perceive it to be something other than that.
Thank you. And can I just bring you to the matter of DNA evidence and what kind of training is given to staff on DNA evidence? Because evidently in 2009 there was DNA evidence that wasn't properly understood, and there were opportunities to get fuller DNA results. That was missed. So the CCRC's response to Chris Henley's recommendation said that forensic science and expert evidence advisor would be appointed. Is that advisor in position, and what training is given to staff?
Amanda?
So a couple of recommendations that Mr Henley made around that. He recommended annual DNA training for our staff. So we have this year, or late last year and this year, we've arranged 3 sessions from external providers to provide training on DNA evidence. We have appointed a forensic advisor. They're not in post yet. They're going through the pre-employment checks.
And what kind of turnover of staff do you have?
So relatively low amongst our casework staff.
About 3 times a year, or whatever you
So we've done 3 sessions this year. We will do ongoing training. So
everybody's trained already?
Yes.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you very much indeed. And what other scientific expertise? You said you've changed the way that you operate. So how often do you employ forensic experts? How often do you employ specialists?
So we would employ forensic experts whenever the case requires it. So whenever there is a possibility that this is a case where there might be an opportunity for forensic evidence, we'll take advice from experts. And it's not just forensic science, that could be medical experts, that could be psychiatric evidence. What's
the trigger for that? Because clearly there's been a big problem, hasn't there, in the past, where if you're just... If no one recognises the importance of somebody who's in prison saying, you know, I wasn't there, and you've got DNA evidence, clearly that we've got several cases, have we not, where that the person who's been convicted, their DNA evidence wasn't evident anywhere. There's nothing, but there are other, apparently male DNA on clothing or whatever. What triggers your caseworkers to go, ooh, I need an expert? I mean, they'll be calling them in all the time, I presume.
So it depends on the analysis of the case. Obviously, each case is different. DNA is a complex topic. It can be very significant in some cases, and it may have no part to play in others. So it's the decision to seek expert evidence is based on the analysis of the case. Now, clearly, that analysis was wrong in Mr Malkinson's case.
And others.
And we missed a key detail in that case. But we have now instituted the Forensic Opportunities Programme, really to look at 2 things. One is to look at whether there are other cases where we've missed opportunities to obtain forensic evidence, but also to revisit cases which perhaps we last looked at 10, 15, 20 years ago. Forensic science moves on. There may be opportunities in those cases that simply didn't exist last time we looked at it. So that programme is in operation now to revisit those cases, to identify forensic opportunities and to pursue those opportunities.
So what you're saying to me is the recommendation that Chris Henley made about all cases that related to the possibility where there was DNA opportunities that might need to be looked at again, that is in train because you have adopted all of his recommendations. That is happening.
So that programme of work had actually started before Mr Henley's recommendation. We'd done some initial work on that. We are focused initially, in order to make it manageable, on cases where the applicant was convicted of either rape or murder or attempts before the 1st of January 2016, so allowing for a margin of error for DNA 2017 to have come in. DNA 17, sorry. We are looking at those as our first cohort of cases, but we may then expand it to other offences. I'm not sure that Mr Henley appreciated the scale and the volume of cases that we dealt with, and the number that it might entail to look at every case where there are potential DNA opportunities.
But every case is a person.
Absolutely, absolutely. But as I say, we've started with the rape and murder cases first, and we can then move on to other cases once we've done those.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I wonder if that might be an opportunity just to take a 5-minute break, which I will do now, and we'll resume at in 7 minutes, 5 to 4, 15:35. We may need to go a little bit after 4:30 in order to make up the time and ensure we cover the areas we want to, so I hope you'll bear with us, but I will adjourn till 15:35. Order. Order. We're resuming this afternoon's session of the Justice Select Committee, looking at the work of the Criminal Cases Review Commission and hearing from its Chief Executive, Karen Kneller, and Casework Operations Director, Amanda Pearce. The next set of questions will come from Sarah Russell.
Thank you. Thank you for returning. I am interested in the post office cases. I can see here, for instance, from the library that David Hedges was convicted of theft and false accounting in January 2011. His case was referred, you received an application for review of the conviction in November 2015, and that case was referred to the Court of Appeal in 2020. That appears to be, there appear to be a number of cases in that sort of timescale. Do you feel that they were dealt with in a timely fashion?
I think there were a lot of external factors there in respect of litigation.
Yes, so at the time that we were conducting our reviews of the first batch of post office cases that we received, we were also aware that the civil litigation was ongoing and that the outcome of that civil litigation would be important. That litigation, the judgment was given in, I think, December 2019, and we referred our first cases in, I think, around June 2020. So it was the decision in the civil case which was really significant and really key to those referrals, and once we'd got that, we moved very quickly. The earlier review that we conducted, we hadn't found the basis for referral, but we were mindful that the civil litigation was ongoing at the same time and that the outcome of that would be really significant.
Did the people whose cases they were want you to wait for the outcome of the civil litigation?
I think without the outcome of the civil litigation, there wasn't a basis to refer the cases. So the civil litigation made that really critical finding that the Horizon system was flawed. And once we'd got that decision, that enabled us to refer the cases. The people whose cases we were looking at that time were kept informed, and they were aware that we were waiting for the outcome of the civil litigation.
Thank you. In terms of the questions that I was asking earlier about the £2.8 million in the budget, you referred to IT spend, but I've had a little look, and IT spend only accounts for about £600,000 worth of that £2.8 million. The biggest tranche of it, at £700,000 or so, just appears to sort of say assorted expenses. It's difficult from the accounts to gain an understanding of what that 2.8 million was spent on when the largest single item in it is completely undetailed.
If it would assist the committee, I think probably, because I don't have all the numbers in my head, it's probably better if we write with a more detailed breakdown, if that would assist. I would anticipate there are all sorts of things in there, including depreciation of assets, but I don't want to mislead or sort of take us up a garden path. So,
yeah, depreciation of assets is dealt with separately. Yeah. That £2.8 million, like there's £300,000 worth of training budget in there. Seems reasonable to me. If you've done a review that you would want to train your staff, like no one's going to dispute some of that cost. But understanding where that better part of 800 grand went and what on, out of a £10 million budget, that is I think it's meant to be about an £8 million budget. That's a significant proportion of your spend that there's no transparency around.
Well, I'm sure that there is the transparency. If it's not there, then we can certainly write on that. But I simply don't have those details in my head. But we can absolutely provide that information.
Thank you. It would be nice to understand what proportion of it was the crisis comms. When you write.
I think I said earlier the crisis comms was under 20,000.
Thank you.
So when we engaged the consultant to support the comms team, I think he was engaged for about 6 months or so, but the spend was under 20,000.
Thank you. In terms of the commissioners and their commissioner roles, how do they typically spend their time?
Commissioners are appointed to take decisions in cases, and that is where they spend the majority of their time. Some cases, and Amanda might want to expand on this, but in some cases we will nominate a commissioner to take the lead on a case if it's perhaps a particularly complex case, or it's going to be a long-running case for whatever reason. So there's part of the time spent on overseeing and supervising certain cases, but the majority of their time is spent on taking final decisions in cases.
Yes, that's right. So they will either sit as a committee of 3 commissioners where there is a possibility of referral on a case, or they will make decisions as individual commissioners if the recommendation is that there is no basis for referral, and they can move from that single commissioner to a committee if they disagree. So the case review manager will carry out the review, conduct the necessary investigations, make a recommendation, and then the case will go to a commissioner for decision. But as Karen says, there are cases where we appoint a commissioner at an earlier stage if there are critical decisions to be made, for example.
In the last year, how many of those cases that have gone to a single commissioner have been escalated up to a 3-person panel?
I would have to check. I don't know offhand. I don't think it will be a huge number, but I would have to check.
Thank you. And the Criminal Appeals Act 1995 makes provision for not fewer than 11 commissioners. How many FTE commissioners are there at present?
So we have 9 commissioners, so 9 heads, 9 commissioners at the moment. The FTE of that, I'm actually not sure what that would be. But they typically, I say typically, on average are probably doing a couple of days a week on decision making.
So that equates to maybe 2 or 3 people full time?
Probably slightly above that.
Yeah.
Do you feel that's adequate?
No. So we don't have enough commissioners. There's currently a commissioner recruitment exercise that is, I think, probably halfway through, and I would hope that we would have additional commissioners arriving, I would hope, by Christmas. So no, that we don't have enough commissioners. Ideally, we would have been in a position of commencing a campaign to appoint new commissioners probably 2 years or so ago, but it didn't happen for various reasons. We have absolutely got an issue of not having enough commissioners, but that's only because we were overdue a recruitment exercise.
When did you last do a recruitment exercise?
Well, we were hoping to start one, I think, about 2 years ago. So I think the last one was probably about 5 years ago. It's probably 2020, probably about 2020.
And why has there not been one in the intervening period?
So a number of things. I mean, firstly, it's not on the commission. So we, as an arm's length body, the Ministry of Justice deals with this for us. And we work very closely with them on that. There were concerns and issues around the fee that commissioners were getting and whether it was sufficiently high enough to be able to retain commissioners, because we saw some commissioners appointed then leaving to take up judicial careers, which was fantastic for them, but clearly an issue for us. And it took, I think, longer than we would all have liked to resolve the fee issue. Once that was resolved, MOJ was then able to start the recruitment exercise. And then, of course, I think the general election got in the way as well. So we are certainly understaffed in terms of the numbers of commissioners. There's no doubt about that.
Can you explain to me exactly what you see as having been your role in this? Well, it sounds like you're describing a situation in which you have been profoundly understaffed at a senior level, a very senior level, arguably the most important people in your organisation.
Makers, absolutely.
Indeed. You haven't done any recruitment of them for 5 years. I understand that you're saying that that was ultimately in the gift of the MOJ. But how long have you been understaffed for? What lobbying have you done of the MOJ? How has this situation arisen?
So I think what I can say is that probably 3 years or so ago, possibly more, we started negotiations around the fee. I can't really talk on behalf of MOJ, but I know that this is a department that's running a number of campaigns and is a department under pressure. But there was regular contact from me and from others in the organisation. But until we could resolve the fee issue, we couldn't move to start the recruitment exercise.
Why not?
Because one of our concerns was not only around retention, but was about ensuring that we were able to attract people who could effectively afford to give up one role to join us. So that fee needed to be pitched at the right level, was our view.
I think it's worth saying that the commissioners that we do have, where possible, have done additional days wherever they can to support the work over this period of time as well.
So we've seen a lot of, particularly I think a couple of commissioners who have a lot more free time have flexed up and have done substantially more days.
Do you feel that this in any way contributed to the sense that was reflected in the chair's letter and apparently in previous letters that management in this organisation was not as it should have been?
No, I think that's a completely distinct issue, and the characterisation in that resignation letter is not a characterisation that I or any of the senior team, or I think anyone in the organisation, recognises.
In terms of the unfavourable reports around your leadership, you appear to have undertaken some training. How did you make the decision as to what training you would have?
So the business school in question, that they provided training which was commensurate with the work that senior leaders or chief executives do, and it was entirely suited to the work that I was doing in my role. All public leaders take training. The recommendation in respect of that particular business school, it came highly recommended from the ex-chair because she herself had gone through some of their programs. So that's the reason why we opted for the training at that particular institution.
But to go back a step, how did you decide what your training needs were?
So, in discussion with the chair, the new chair she was then, my own concerns around the fact that I've now been chief executive for 12 years, I'm entering my 13th year. I hadn't taken the opportunity of doing any external training, which I don't think is good, and I think sends a bad message to your own organisation. I think a commission model is quite an unusual model. It has a lot of challenges in terms of governance and how you deal with those issues and how you run the organisation. So those were a number of the factors that I had in mind when I was looking for how I could best develop with support of a business school, and they provided what seemed to be something that would be perfectly suited.
So what review did you do of the market?
So I sort of compared and contrasted to see what other offers were available, including over here in London, and there was nothing that matched, absolutely nothing that matched that offer. The people that go to that business school are commercial, public sector, third sector, UK-based, European, wider afield. So the skill mix, the experience, what you get from that sort of environment, I think is really hard to match. And in terms of quality, I think it was second to none. I wouldn't have done it otherwise.
Can I ask a specific question around that? What did you gain specifically from going to INSEAD in Paris?
So it's management and leadership training. So it's all about my development as a leader, about things around resilience, taking an organisation through incredibly turbulent times. We were going through COVID. We were becoming a remote working organisation, so some significant cultural issues to deal with there. We were leading a massive digital transformation programme. So, and also, dealing with an increasing intake, lots more people were coming to us, much higher intake from new applicants. So leading on significant transformation whilst improving the performance of the organisation, those were all things that I took from INSEAD. It's very difficult because leadership training, it's quite difficult to sort of point to one tangible thing, but I suppose one tangible thing would be the digital transformation. Another tangible thing would be the successful moving to remote working in such a way that we were able to continue to do casework, because if we had not moved to remote working, I think our casework would have suffered significantly because we simply couldn't get people in post.
I want to bring in Neil Shastri-Hurst, but could you just confirm, were the figures quoted in The Guardian correct? Which is that the course you went on was more than £21,000 for 10 days teaching over 3 trips, as well as a week-long programme on digital disruption and innovation, also a 3-day leading from the chair course in 2021, the fees for which are currently £7,500. Is that the sort of sums we're talking about for your training?
So I don't know if those precise sums are the sums that we paid, because I guess that's what they are advertised at as of the time of that article. I mean, what I can say is that over the course of my 12, 13 years as a chief executive, the organisation has invested around £50,000 in my development.
Thank you very much, Chair. And can we just pick up that strand? So you've been in charge for 12 to 13 years now. You're saying this is the first time you were offered external training, or the first time you took up that opportunity?
So I think it was the first time I actually paused to consider doing it, because I'd been busy in the organisation running it, and it was only as a new chair came in that there was conversations about, what development have you had?
You would have been aware that you would want those who worked under you to do professional development. You didn't consider it was appropriate for you to do the same?
It was absolutely not that I didn't consider that it wasn't appropriate for me to do the same. I think as a chief executive, it's such a full-time job. It's actually finding the time to do it. So it simply wasn't a case of I didn't think I needed to do it. This was the first time that someone actually said to me, I think it's time to prioritise your own development a little bit.
But you're in a senior management position.
Yes.
And you didn't consider it a priority for you to ensure that you were developing so that you could provide an organisation with the leadership that it required?
I found my development was something that I dealt with personally myself, rather than by going through external training. So that was something I did for myself, but external training I simply hadn't, and maybe it's a mistake, maybe I ought to have done that a few years earlier, but I didn't.
In that case, can you set out what continuing professional development you did do in those 12, 13 years, and the number of hours on average per year?
No, I can't, because what I'm saying is what I did was sort of personal reflective stuff. So, reading around for
no
example.
formalised
No,
training.
I'm saying that's the only formalised external training I've had as a chief executive.
No formalised internal training either.
No, not as a chief executive. I certainly would have taken part in the casework training, but not as a senior leader.
Following Helen Pitcher's resignation, there were a number of, it would be fair to say, unfavourable reports in the media, including The Guardian. In one of those, staff were reported as describing you as being absent in your leadership, with your finger off the pulse. How would you describe those assessments? Do you think they're fair?
No, I don't recognise that at all. I was very much in the organisation, and that's one of the reasons why I hadn't taken opportunities to go outside and undertake external stuff. So I've been highly visible within the organisation, weekly updates to staff, monthly staff briefings. I'm in calls and meetings all the time. So that is not something that I recognise.
And I'm right in thinking you're an employed barrister. Are you
Yes.
still a registered barrister?
Yes.
So you have, I'm a registered barrister. I have professional development
Yes.
requirements each year that have to be formalised
Yes.
and documented. Were you doing that over the last
Oh yes.
decade
So
or so?
yes, no. So when I'm talking about training, I'm just talking about training in respect of training as a senior leader.
So you were doing separate training as a barrister?
Yes. So I was doing my own personal development.
Can I just row back to the issue around commissioners?
So I didn't hear you.
The issue around commissioners.
Commissioners.
In your tenure, when was the last time you had a full complement of 11 commissioners?
John retired.
Yeah, I'm not sure. We had a commissioner who retired early, a couple of years ago. I think at that point we had 11. Yeah.
A couple of years ago? And we talked
Yes.
2-3 years ago?
Probably.
I
I'm
don't
just
think
trying
it would
to
be as long as 3 years ago.
think-
I would say probably 18 months, 2 years.
Do you think you could write to the chair and set out
Yes.
precisely when the last time you had a full complement?
Absolutely.
And you mentioned in response to an answer of the role of the commissioners, you said they worked 1 or 2 days a week. My understanding was that they were appointed on 52 days per year. So is that 2 or 3 days per week, then taking in time that they're not working? Some weeks they don't work, some weeks they do. Would it average out at 52 days a year?
So they're appointed on a minimum 52 days, absolutely, but the majority of them do more than that. So I don't think there are very, very many who only do a day a week, if any at all.
And given the complex nature of the work, do you think it's sufficient, even if they're doing 2 days a week, to be able to get a handle of what are complicated and challenging cases?
I do. I think the challenge we have is that we don't have enough commissioners, but I do think that it's about the quality of the commissioner, and I think our commissioners absolutely can do that.
You've said there's not enough commissioners. We know you're under the minimum. How many do you think you realistically need to do your job to the standard that the public would expect?
I think we could probably do with another half a dozen or so.
So we're
At least.
you're talking about 15, 16.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're some way short.
Yes.
Just turning to the role of the chair, Helen Pitcher was appointed on an agreement that she would work 10 days per month for over a 3-year term. Do you think that's adequate in terms of time commitment to this role?
I think as the commission is currently structured, I think it is, yes.
Her predecessor, in fact, the initial holder of the office of chair, Sir Frederick Crawford, worked significantly more than that. I'm also aware that Helen Pitcher had a number of other positions. Given the real importance, and we've heard about, these are individuals, these aren't statistics, they're individuals. Should this not have the sole focus of an individual who is chairing and leading this organisation?
Well, I think as the Commission's currently structured, the chair role is a part-time role. I'm not sure it's for me, it's possibly for others to comment on how or what other roles they should be doing with the rest of their time.
And in your tenure, I think it's just captured in your tenure, we've moved from commissioners being a full-time appointment to a part-time appointment in 2017. What was the rationale behind moving from one model to the other?
So the change was a move not from full-time to part-time, but from salaried to fee paid. That was the change that was made. And I mean, I think the Commission was possibly one of the last organisations to have public appointees who were anything other than fee paid. So I think we were already out of step elsewhere, but this was around trying to improve the diversity and bring in a sort of a wider skill set. So that was the sort of thinking behind that. And I think as a result, we've certainly seen that the Commissioner cadre has grown a lot younger in terms of average age, I think would be fair.
Given the quasi-judicial role of it, did you consider having a mixed structure, a hybrid structure of fee paid and salaried, as you would see in a number of tribunals?
So I'm not sure that we would agree that it is quasi-judicial. A hybrid model, I don't believe that was considered. I mean, my view is it's less about the terms and the condition, it's about having good quality people. We have now been operating that model for some time, and it seems to work. The issue around commissioners isn't around the fact that they're fee paid, it's around the fact that, you know, we have been waiting to get new commissioners in the organisation.
Just moving on to governance arrangements, they were changed under the MOJ's tailored review in 2019. Can you say how they were originally conceived and how they're operating now, and how you find that arrangement is working for you?
I think the main governance change was that the board comprised all of the commissioners, myself, the two directors, and the chair. And the main change to that arrangement was that the board was reduced to a smaller size and to be more balanced and to be more in keeping with sort of the UK Corporate Governance Code.
And how regularly do those boards meet?
So the board tends to meet every other month.
And how often do you get all the commissioners together?
So all of the commissioners, they tend to meet chaired by the chair twice a year, I think. But it's not unusual for there to be ad hoc meetings of all commissioners as a group, sort of informally. And I think that takes place monthly.
Given there are only 2 formalised meetings scheduled a year with commissioners, and they have an integral part in the process, do you think that is sufficient engagement to ensure that they've got oversight of the organisation and the leadership structures?
Well, I think so. I think this comes back to some of the challenges with a commission model in terms of governance. But the commissioners, who are the body corporate, have delegated, if you like, their authority to the board. So that they have placed that responsibility into the board. So the board is carrying out that function. If there were issues, then commissioners would call meetings. That they are not a shy and retiring bunch. So I think the way it's currently structured seems to be working. But I do come back to the fact that you have formal meetings, but there's an awful lot of informal engagement that's going on as well, including catching up and liaising with the board.
How often are those informal arrangements taking place? Because if they don't know what the problems are, they can't hold the board to account.
Well, they would know what the problems are because they are in the organisation doing the work. informally, I think they meet, it's monthly.
Thank you very much. We're now going to come on to you and talk about resources. Was there anything else on this matter before we conclude?
Well, it's linked to resources, so I can probably follow on to resources. So I do understand that, excuse me, during the period between 2005 and 2018 and 2019, you had real terms reduction in funding by up to 40%. And I just wanted to know how that reduction affected the work of the Commission and whether you feel that that impact is still being felt today.
I think it's quite difficult comparing funding today to funding of a decade or 2 decades ago. And I think, we were funded 15 to 20 years ago better than we are now, but I think currently we are better funded than we were, say, 5 years ago. There isn't a chief executive in this country who wouldn't put a hand up and say, I would like more money, please. And what we could do with more money is we could appoint more staff. We could address casework more quickly than we currently can. We are increasingly seeing applicants who aren't represented. I mean, most applicants who come to us simply aren't represented. We could do more to support them if we had more staff. So there are lots of things we could do with more money, including, the Forensic Opportunities Programme Amanda's talked about. MOJ have given us additional funding to support that, which is amazing. Because that's an important piece of work, but it has started us thinking about whether there is a bigger part we could play in terms of being an organisation that is more proactive. So we were set up as an organisation to respond, a responsive organisation. Applications come in, we deal with them. If in a particular application we think there's an issue or a theme, we would write out to people who we think may be affected to encourage them to apply to us. And Amanda, you might want to say a bit more of this on the back of the programme that you're doing. We are thinking that there is so much out in society which is changing all of the time, that there is something to be said about whether we would benefit from having a separate unit within the Commission that is proactive, reaching out to applicants who may not realise that they're even suffering from a miscarriage of justice. And I'm not just talking about changes in forensic science, but changes in the law, changes in society's understanding of neurodevelopment, for example. So there are lots of areas that, if we were funded, we could do. But, we need to be pragmatic and work within the budget that we have.
Yes, so we have a small thematic opportunities group we call a thematic opportunities group, where we're looking at themes and causes of miscarriages of justice. So if, for example, we become aware of a discredited police officer, what can we do to identify other cases where that individual might have played a part? If we become aware of a discredited expert or a scientific technique that's been discredited, what can we do to find cases that might have affected? Where the law changes, are there cases that we can identify? So we're starting to do that, but we have to do it on a very small scale because of the resources that we have at the moment. But we've got 30-odd thousand closed cases, and there may be cases in there where, as a result of developments since we last looked at a case, there could be things that we could do. But at the moment, we don't have the resources to do that. That's something that we would like to do much more of. We do outreach to potential applicants, but this is about trying to target particular issues that might give rise to cases that could be referred, and we'd love to be able to do a lot more of that.
So you did previously answer a question of mine in terms of recruitment when you said that you were able to extend the pool of applicants because you were able to offer remote working, but at the same time you've said that you would like a lot more commissioners and you haven't been up to the full quota anyway. So are you saying that the lack of commissioners is because of funding?
No, I think lack of commissioners is down to the fact that it's taken a lot longer than any of us would have liked to get the recruitment campaign off the ground. So that's not a funding issue.
Okay. And would the funding have an impact on whether you decide to undertake DNA testing or perhaps commission an expert?
No, it never has.
The other thing that I wanted to touch upon was whether there was any tension for resources between the need to minimise delays in completing case reviews and undertaking investigations to ensure miscarriages aren't missed. So are you certain in your responses that funding doesn't have any impact on the decisions that you make as to whether or not you feel that there has been a miscarriage of justice and whether that case could then be referred to the Court of Appeal?
I'm thinking of some of our longer running cases. So we have cases that we call long running cases that we keep under review. Our experience is that we tend to keep cases open perhaps for longer than they need to be because there's an anxiety that there may be something in the case and we want to make sure we've not missed it, and increasingly I think that's the case. So I'm not sure that funding is something that would play on the mind of an individual case review manager. In fact, I don't think I've ever heard that.
No, I mean there is a tension between thoroughness and timeliness in reviewing cases. Inevitably, we get, as we said, sort of 1,500-1,600 cases a year. If we were to investigate those from scratch in every single case, we wouldn't have the resources to get through that. But these are cases which have been through the system, so there's been a trial, there's been an appeal. So we are a review body, so we have to decide what lines of investigation to pursue. If that line of investigation might make a difference to the case, then we will follow it up regardless of funding and cost. Obviously, we try to get best value for money if we're commissioning testing, for example. But so funding doesn't play a part in that sense. But you're right that there is always a tension between how thoroughly you review a case and how long it takes. But we would always do the things that we need to do.
Like you say, everyone would say that they would want more money in what they're doing. The Henry report did recommend that the government increases the level of funding provided to the Commission. And I was wondering that if say, as part of the spending review, the Commission's budget were to be increased by an extra 25%, what do you think that additional funding would be useful for? How would you use that extra money? How would that make the job of the Commission of higher quality and more effective?
I would have thought one of the things, and I'm sure Amanda wants to step in a moment, but one of the things it would do would mean that we could bring down the portfolio sizes of case review managers. I mean, that wouldn't happen instantly because, of course, you need to, appoint new staff. But they are managing a high number of cases, so we'd bring that down. So that would be certainly the first difference I think that we would see, and that would be a key difference. That would make a big difference.
And the funding has been increased, hasn't it, for 2024 to 2025?
Yes.
So that 40% real terms reduction that I mentioned earlier, that's been reduced to about 15% now, hasn't it?
Sounds about right.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm going to hand over to Pam Cox, who I think will ask you some more questions about the way you operate and work.
Thank you very much. Listening to this and reflecting on the brief we've had and reading some of the press reports, over time it seems that the Criminal Cases Review Commission has lost its way. If you're taking a 20-year view of how it was, how it operates today in terms of focused staff time, staff legal expertise, organisational resource and organisational direction. And since the Malkinson case, some serious questions about leadership, which we've discussed today, can you see why people might take that view?
Well, I understand why people would, and I think I come back to, I would urge this committee and others to judge our performance across all of our casework, and not only those cases which get into the headlines, which is a tiny, tiny minority of our casework. And I think that is a big challenge for us, because most of the applicants and those that are represented, or campaigners who come to us, will be disappointed, because in most cases we are not finding a reason to refer that case back to the relevant appeal court. But it isn't, we don't accept that characterisation, because we are seeing hundreds and hundreds of cases, working through those. We talked about closing cases, that in many ways it's much harder to close a case and not refer it than to make a referral. And closed cases can be cases that have been opened and had investigations on them running for many months or even years. That is quite nuanced and quite difficult to get out into the media. So I understand when people read what may be in the press, why they may reach that conclusion, but I think it's unfortunate, because it doesn't reflect the very hard work that all of the case review managers and casework are putting into the cases, and it doesn't capture the performance of the organisation. It's only a reflection of that small number which are in the headlines.
So the organisation is doing critically important work for justice and democracy, and it's vital that it has public confidence. What do you feel needs to be done to repair the lack of public confidence that's currently exhibited around this organisation?
So I think we really need to have an interim chair who is going to help in that regard, because they will advocate, be an ambassador and champion, I hope, for the organisation. We don't have that figurehead, and without that figurehead, I think it is difficult for the organisation. That does make it quite unsettling, and our role as a senior team has been to focus internally on the staff, ensuring that we continue with that casework. So that's the piece that's missing, I think.
Thank you.
Sorry, just to add to that, I think legislative change to allow us to speak more about the cases that we investigate would help, because one of the difficulties that we face is it's very difficult to counter a public narrative, because there is a statutory restriction on what we can say about the cases that we've investigated. So it's very easy in some cases to present a partial view of a case, and we're not in a position to be able to respond and explain our decisions in more detail. And I think if we had the ability to explain our decisions in more detail, that would go a long way to supporting confidence in the decisions that we make.
Thank you. I appreciate those answers, and I think colleagues have probed the role you've both played in trying to effect that change, but I think we are left with some questions as to how successful you may have been there. Let me turn to casework, case review management work. Your most recent annual report says that you have a full complement of case managers, but more are needed. Can you tell us how many more are needed and when they will be recruited?
So we've recently increased from 5 casework groups to 6, and that will obviously help. We could always use more case review managers, but we have to work within the budget that we have. So at the moment there are no plans to expand the team, but that is something that we would like to do.
And to whom do case review managers turn to advice? And at what point? I mean, we've touched on some of that in previous questioning, but perhaps you could just set that out again.
So there are a range of people available to provide advice in casework. So as I say, we have the 6 casework groups. Each has a group leader, so they're available to provide advice to case review managers. We also have an in-house investigations team and a legal team that are available to provide advice. And then we've obviously got commissioners as well. And as we spoke about earlier, on some of the more complex cases, we might assign a commissioner during the course of the review rather than simply at the decision-making stage. We've also got, I should add, we introduced the role of specialist case review manager, so to draw together expertise on particular topics. So, for example, we've got a case review manager who is a specialist in human trafficking cases. We've got someone who specialises in cases from Northern Ireland, and we're trying to build that up as well because case review managers draw a lot of advice and guidance from each other. It's really important that they're able to speak to each other, to discuss cases, to have that kind of constructive challenge on cases. So they do provide advice to each other as well.
And I'm sure everybody here appreciates the sensitive and complex nature of the work that's done, and we should put that on record. In what proportion of cases are the CCRC's supplementary powers used?
In terms of which powers in particular are you thinking of?
The range of supplementary powers you hold.
So we would issue Section 17 notices where we can require public bodies to produce material in every case that we look at, almost every case that we look at. Sometimes that's a formal notice, other times that is around our access to other systems within the criminal justice system. So we have access to the digital court system, for example, to be able to access files. So we would use that, probably thousands of times a year, certainly more than 1,000 times a year. We then have a power to require the appointment of an investigating officer from the original force. That's a much less used power. We tend to do most of our own investigations, but we do use that, for example, if we needed to interview a witness under caution. We can't interview somebody under caution, that's not a power that we have, so we would generally go down the route of requiring the appointment of an investigating officer. We've then got Section 21, which is in very broad terms and sort of, I would describe it as my favourite section because it sort of says you can do whatever you need to do to get the job done. So that might involve commissioning expert work, it might involve taking statements, it might involve interviewing somebody. And again, that will depend on the nature of the cases, but that is used day in, day out on cases.
So you're making extensive use of those powers. And my final questions are around remote working. Now, we opened with that, and I think many of us were quite surprised by the extent of remote working. We understand the justifications you've given around recruitment and so on. But given the nature of the work and some of the distressing and sensitive nature of the material that your remote caseworkers will be viewing daily, how do you support them and supervise them and make sure that they are managing?
It's been a sort of defining characteristic of the Commission since we started is the sort of collegiate nature of the work that we do, the fact that people will drop things to assist each other, and we've tried to ensure that that continues in the remote working space. So we encourage people to make contact with each other, we encourage people to work collaboratively where that's appropriate. We've then obviously got line managers, group leaders who will check in on staff. We've got regular weekly group meetings. We have an all-staff event twice a year, and we encourage people to make use of Teams and to reach out to each other and to speak to people.
I think I appreciate that, but it makes me go back to a previous question, which was around perceptions of the leadership being remote. So how do we weigh those things up if staff are reporting that they're feeling remote from the leadership?
I think I would go back to say that I think sort of unsupported sources are not necessarily an accurate reflection of the way that people feel. I think people do feel supported. I say my door is open, a virtual door is open. It's not uncommon for staff to contact me to speak about cases. So I don't recognise that as a characterisation of the way we operate. We've had new starters sort of say that they feel really welcomed when they start, notwithstanding that it's a remote organisation. We put a lot of effort into making sure that people are introduced to colleagues, that they can reach out to colleagues, that they're supported, that they've got mentors, that they've got buddies. So a lot of our new starters have sort of said that they do feel welcomed into the organisation.
Thank you very much. We might tap in. Tessa,
just while we're talking about caring for people, and working conditions. I wondered if I might just ask you, you receive bonuses, I presume, every year? You don't? No. Okay, fine. Have you ever received a bonus?
So I had 2 payments, additional payments, for 2022-23 and 2023-24. That was something
unusual.
No, not unusual within the public.
And you said you didn't receive bonuses generally.
No, that's correct. Generally, we don't. But it's I'm not aware. So many public sector organisations do have a system of additional payments or bonuses. I had 2 in those 2 years.
I ask what might have evoked those payments?
I wasn't privy to those discussions. I would anticipate it was, because that was the remuneration committee, I would anticipate it was in respect of probably the digital transformation work that was being undertaken at the time.
Really? Okay, so it was pointed out to me...
Transformation programmes.
Okay, can you remember what sum of money you were paid?
Yes, so one was, I think it was around 3,700, and the other was around, I think it was 8,700.
Okay, and you didn't think that was strange? Bearing in mind all the work you'd put in over many years, that suddenly this popped up, because the comment was made to me that having had a 7.5% pay rise, you then received a bonus of, yes, in the order of 8 to 9, possibly £10,000. I don't have the accurate figure. A month before Andrew Malkinson was exonerated. That would look peculiar to anybody who was just looking from outside. As you said, you're a transparency organisation, but I just wondered about that, and I'm amazed that you're not curious about what it is that you were being rewarded for.
Oh, I think so. I'm not privy to those conversations. My understanding is that, or my understanding was that it would have been in respect of the transformation work that was going on within the organisation at the time. We are fully transparent, and those figures would have been reported in the annual report and accounts.
I'm just amazed that... Sorry, I think, Sarah, if you don't mind.
On the topic of the annual reported accounts over those years, the timeliness of review of cases, the number of cases under review for 2 years or more, the target over that period was less than 40 cases. In 2021 to 22, it was 46 cases. In 2022 to 23, it was 55 cases. By 2023 to 2024, it was 99 cases. So that's more than doubling over the period that we're talking about. 2 years feels like a good length of time to investigate something properly. Why are there 100, or were there at that point 100 or so cases that had been under review for 2 years or more? And what are the current figures now?
So the reason why cases under review for 2 years or more have increased was down to a lack of staff. So we flagged the issue quite early on when our performance, our KPIs and long-running cases, those measures were a lot better. Because we knew that we were having issues appointing staff, we were able to predict and forecast that would mean 2 or 3 years down the line, we would see cases, a growing number of cases, taking longer to review, and that is precisely what happened. So, we're not happy with that, but I don't think we're surprised by it.
No, and I think what you have to bear in mind is that people are not working on a single case at a time. So our case review managers are working on around 30 cases at a time. So it's not 2 years solid work. They're juggling cases, and some of those cases are very complex, some require expert evidence, some are dependent on the outcome of other investigations which are outside our control. But as Karen says, there are more long-running cases than we would like, but there is a juggling exercise between keeping on top of the smaller cases and getting through those longer cases as well. And some of those cases are ones where we are continuing to investigate because they are cases that give us concern, and we are looking for some new evidence in those cases.
What's the number for this year?
I looked yesterday, it's 97.
Yes, thank you. We're going to look at independence now, so new sort of area. So firstly, more generally, how would you characterise the current working relationship with the Ministry of Justice now, and has it changed since you've joined?
So I think we have a constructive relationship with the Ministry of Justice. We have a good relationship on a day-to-day basis with officials. I think my one concern is that things can take longer than certainly we would like, and probably longer than MOJ officials would like also. And I go back to Commissioner recruitment as a key example of that. But they, when we talked to them about issues, so the Forensic Opportunities Programme, we were able to reach very quickly, for example, an understanding around the budgetary need on that. So I think it's a good relationship.
Good. That's good to hear.
Well, any part in casework decisions.
No. Okay. I mean,
perception of independence, and perception is as important, if not more. But absolutely, and there is that independence line, which in my view has never been crossed. I think possibly difficult to describe where it is, but I would know it if someone was about to cross it, and I'd be sounding the alarm. So I'm very comfortable with independence. With MOJ officials. I meet routinely with them, probably fortnightly. So yeah, regular meetings. I haven't met with ministers though, but that tended to be through the chair. So my relationship with the MOJ is through officials. Certainly, my view is, why wouldn't we welcome it? I see no issue with that at all. In fact, I think actually, one, it recognises that we are a key player in the criminal justice system, but two, I hope having that level of scrutiny and an inspectorate might perhaps flush out and deal with some of the issues that are being raised this afternoon, where I think as an organisation we do struggle to get our voice heard. So I would welcome an inspectorate. Absolutely.
Thank you.
A huge amount of practical difference. So what we're talking about here is the court's power to direct the Commission to investigate on its behalf when it's considering a first instance appeal. Those directions come to us. We are given some leeway in how we implement those directions, how we conduct the investigations. it is highly unlikely that were the court to ask us to conduct an investigation on their behalf that we would refuse. Why would we? So I think, it's possibly a presentational thing in practical terms.
Is that a perception?
This business of perceived independence, and we've already heard this afternoon about how the previous chair held several positions at that business school in Fontainebleau, which you attended. But she was also chair of the Judicial Appointments Commission, and I wonder whether that's something that, certainly if I was inside a prison, I might feel pretty uncomfortable about the chair of the Criminal Cases Review Commission having any hand in judicial appointments. Has anybody made any comment about that? Or I'm hoping, if you're not able to comment, at least I've put it on the record that it probably shouldn't be something, there shouldn't be a muddling of the independence of the CCRC's chair with any other aspect of our legal framework at all.
Well, I think I understand it's been mooted that when it comes to the appointment of the substantive chair for the Commission, there will be some pre-appointment scrutiny, which I think would probably be helpful in that regard.
Yeah. I've always got more questions, yeah.
If no other members of the committee have any questions, I'd like to just, if I may, feel free to make any further comments you wish. Just to go back right to the very beginning, I asked you about how often you attended. You gave an answer about remote working and so forth. But I think for myself here, I was quite shocked by that. It seems to me if I went into if I visited your head offices in Birmingham, perfectly adequate premises, on any day, I wouldn't find any senior management there. I wouldn't find any commissioners there. I wouldn't find any caseworkers there. And I'm not sure that's a good way to operate in any event. I mean, by comparison, Criminal Injuries Compensation Authority, who also do difficult and sensitive work, require their staff to be in for at least 60% of the time. But given what's happened with your previous chair, the Malkinson case and other matters that have come to light, if I were the chief executive here, I would be in every day from when those issues. I'd be asking my staff to be there. I'd be working with those staff. I'd be trying to rebuild the organisation so that the commissioners and the board had a much more hands-on role in that way. And that doesn't seem to have happened at all. And I'm afraid I found your defence of what is to us a hugely important organisation, I'm sure it's hugely important to you, has been pretty half-hearted and has been really a reflection that things are going pretty well, apart from one or two difficult cases. And where that leaves me, and comment on that as you wish, is to ask whether you really feel now, given everything that's happened, that you are the right people to lead this organisation forward.
Well, I will speak on Amanda's behalf, but I think we are absolutely the right people to lead this organisation. The observation you make about remote working, I come back to, had we not moved to that model, we would not be doing casework to the degree that we would need to do to make referrals, because we simply would not have filled vacancies. And I think coming back to
that's adequate. We have.
Well,
you said you don't recognise the model that we've described, but we've heard from ex-commissioners, we've heard from caseworkers, and they don't feel supported and they don't feel involved in the organisation, and there does seem to be a hole at the heart of this organisation.
Well, I mean, you've said you've heard from ex-personnel, and I can't really comment on that. What I can say is that the people we have in the organisation now are fully committed, they're fully supported. There is constant management and supervision, and I come back to, if we hadn't moved to that model, we would have had numerous empty seats.
You have got numerous empty seats as commissioners working on a remote model, and how hard did you try? How hard did you push the MOD or anybody else in relation to your budget, your casework and so forth? I can't believe you're the only organisation in the country that hasn't come out of COVID yet.
It's not about coming out of COVID. There is no magic to working in the office. Our staff are connected. They can speak to each other at any time they like. There's no magic to doing work in the office. You know, we're in 2025. It's perfectly possible. We discovered that it is perfectly possible to do a good job working remotely. That has allowed us to attract talent from across the UK that we would not have been able to attract had we insisted on people in being in the office in Birmingham. We were able to refer the post office cases during remote working. Our committees operate remotely. It is perfectly possible to do the work well in the model that we have at present. The idea that there is some magic to being in the office is just simply not true.
Can I just ask you, where else did you consider placing your office? Because clearly there's a difficulty with being in the centre of Birmingham or wherever you are. Where else did you think about putting your office? Because government operates all over the country in all sorts of places, and if you can't get people to come to the office, why don't you move the office? Because I can assure you there are squillions of people who'd like to work, and I'm sure they're all qualified and able, and they could be trained, but they don't necessarily have to be anchored in Birmingham. Where else did you consider?
Well, we didn't consider moving the office anywhere else. We were in lockdown. We found that it worked, so we were able to...
Lockdown, of course it would. I understand that.
Well, no, not necessarily, but we found that it did work in lockdown. We were able to continue finding, investigating and referring miscarriages of justice. That coincided with, we've got to find a way of filling these seats, and we were able to do that by continuing that model. I think closing shop in Birmingham and moving to some unspecified location, I think would have been probably much more problematic for the organisation, for the casework.
You didn't try. It's an intellectual argument at this point because you've chosen not to do it. But my suggestion would be that it might have been an exercise you would have considered amongst all of those risk things that you face on a daily basis. So
this is the very final question, Brenda.
Yeah, I do appreciate the benefits of remote working, but there is a limit. At the moment, you have said that you do not go into the office more than once a month. Sometimes it's once every 2 months. Do you not think that your staff would benefit if they could see leadership, the physical presence of leadership in the office, say once a week? All models of remote working have operated on the basis that after COVID, people have continued working remotely, but they have been going into the office at regular periods, and it could be once a week, sometimes it's twice a week, but to have leadership not there, I think is a worry. And I just, like the chair, I although I'm a great advocate of remote working, I do fail to understand how you do not see that the physical presence of leadership being there or other supervisors being there would be of benefit to the organisation as a whole.
That would require everybody else to be there as well, and our staff are spread across the UK.
You could have a rota system where certain members of the staff go in, others don't, but there will always be a physical presence in the office, at least during regular periods.
I think then with that model you have a hybrid model with the risk of a two-tier working culture, which would be of concern. I mean, I understand what you're saying, but I think the point that we're making is that leadership is visible. It's visible virtually. And I think that the levels of engagement and visibility have increased since we've gone to this model. Remote is perhaps not a great way of describing it because it is anything other than remote. You staff and the senior team, I think, are much more present and visible because we are available and online all of the time.
Look, thank you very much to the committee. Thank you very much for coming along today and for answering all our questions as clearly as you're able to do. And with that, I'm going to draw the session to a close. Order, order.